Welcome to the What's Important Now broadcast. In America today, we are witnessing a cultural shift. This is the show devoted to the battle for the soul of our country. Join our host, Tom Sears, as he explains the issues of our day and join the fight to bring values and morality back. Let's join Tom now as he shares what's important now.
And welcome back to this extended edition of What's Important Now. When I say extended, it is not the same. It is different. It is additional content. I think that's really super important for you to hear. But you do want to go back and listen to Part 3, Is America Dying? Part 3, The Death of Civic Virtue. That is our program that it's sort of in that 30-minute parameter thing because of FM radio. So what I do is what I don't get in, I bounce over here and we do an extended version. So that's what we are doing here. Now, if you've already caught the radio broadcast, you know that we talked about the death of civic virtue and what happens when a nation begins to trade responsibility for entitlement. And so I promised you something more here, and I'm going to deliver. Excuse me. I'm still shaken over this Charlie Kirk thing, and it's really challenging to press on. And I bet the same is true for many of you. But I did not know Charlie Kirk. I know that I was very moved by his passing. And but from those who did know him, this is exactly what he would want. He would want people to continue pressing on and not be silent. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, when I say that we are battling for the soul of America, my voice is not as loud as Charlie Kirk's, but it's important that my voice, whoever hears it, knows that we can be better and we can do better. And that's what this program is about. It's about looking at the issues and trying to find clarity in a world that is just, it's seemingly spinning completely and totally out of control. And so we've been doing this Is America Dying series, and we're on part 3. We've talked about lawlessness. We've talked about the erosion of family values. And now we're talking about the death of civic virtue. And these are all things that Charlie would talk about as he traveled from campus to campus across the country and engaging young people. He was such a bright spot. And again, as I said, ending out the other podcast, for me, it's one of those things like I think you just hear, something on TikTok or Instagram, just, a 30-second soundbite, and you don't know the person. Probably the most heartbreaking thing for me was the video they showed where he was co-hosting Fox and Friends, and his young daughter they set her down on the floor during a break. And she's like walking out nervously, but then her eyes catch her dad. And I can tell you that as a father, I've tried to give my entire life to my kids. And I remember moments like that, like seeing like my young daughters kind of nervously looking around, but then when they locked eyes on me, they took off running. And that's what that video was. And it's just heartbreaking, because those kids now are going to be raised without their father. And it's senseless. And I could go on. I'm not going to, because there is a part of me that's very angry. But we will not be silenced. We will not be silenced. And I'm believing that God is going to use this to raise up a fire in people to stand up. And you know what? And I want to say this before I continue, that this is not about right or left or what side of the aisle you're on, what your beliefs are. You have a right to say those things. There's a lot of things people say that I absolutely hate and 100% completely disagree with, but they have a right to say those things. That's what makes us Americans. We have a right, and we should not fear saying something. I mean, I'm a pastor, and I often contemplate, like, you look at the church violence has risen. I mean, people are just angry. And I listen, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. So if you're out there and you know exactly what I'm saying, like if you believe in the principles of the Bible teaches us this, that this stuff is going to happen. And it's so unfortunate. It's so sad, but we are not wrestling with people. We're wrestling with a spirit. And Charlie understood that. But I'm going to move on because we got to dig a little deeper. And I want to look into two specific things on this extended additional podcast. Number one, I want to look at how our entitlement culture is tied directly to the debt crisis that we're facing in this country. And then number two, I want to look at how our obsession with the modern, what Rome called the bread and circuses. And if you've listened to the other podcast, you've heard me talk about this. It's entertainment. Rome called it bread and circuses. I'm telling you, it's entertainment. And what happens is what we've seen in Rome and what we're seeing in America today is that it weakens the very habits. Think about this. It weakens the very habits that freedom requires. And then I want to get really practical because it's not enough to just diagnose the problem. That doesn't make any sense. We need steps for families and churches that can be made right now, the steps that can be taken right now, that we can begin to once again model civic virtue in a culture that's lost it. And I tried to get into that in the 30-minute program, and I simply ran out of time. I could not get everything in. I hit on three things, but I just could not dive deep. So let's start with entitlement. I don't have any time restrictions here, and I'll go as long or as short as we need to here to get this in. So here's the reality. Entitlement culture, it doesn't just show up in government checks. It's actually an attitude. And I did a program on socialism, and I talked about how the amenities that are given in social programs are expected. And I use the illustration of if you're traveling and you're looking for a hotel, that as a consumer, there are certain things you're looking for. Those things are called amenities. And many people, there are some people that say, well, that's just too much. And they go with a cheaper version of a hotel. But there are those that will not stay at a hotel if it does not have certain amenities. And so, and you can go back and listen to that American Socialism podcast. But anyway, so it's an attitude. Entitlement is an attitude. And it's the belief that someone else should carry the weight. The responsibility belongs to anyone but me. It's an attitude, ladies and gentlemen, and that attitude bleeds directly into economics, okay? So if you look at the numbers, America's national debt is now over $34 trillion. Maybe by the time you hear this, it'll be over 35. As a classroom teacher, I always would bring up in my classes, especially like in economics and really any of my social science classes, I would bring up the debt clock. And I would leave it up through the whole class just so they could, at the beginning of class, this is where it is. And then right at the end, I would say, look how much it's grown. And the debt clock, the one I used, it would say, what each American's responsibility is to pay off that debt. And it's astounding. It's absolutely astounding. So the attitude of entitlement is directly attached to economics. You can't get away from it. It's because of the programs and the things that are offered. So here we are at $34 trillion in debt. That's more than the entire U.S. economy produces in a year. So think about this. You as a wage earner, if you spend more than you make, you will be bankrupt. No way around it. So by definition, again, just on the surface, the U.S. economy is bankrupt. And so we print all this money and there's all this inflation and it's just paper. And I've talked about like the difference between money now versus the money back then. I've talked to you about the silver certificates and how it was actually backed by something. Now it's just an IOU. It's a Federal Reserve note. But the debt is greater than what America produces in the economy. In fact, debt to GDP is higher than at any point since World War II. But here's the difference, and this is important. Back then, America sacrificed. I talked about this in the other part. There was rationing. They were giving things up. They were trading comfort for the better good of everyone. And they rebuilt. Today, we just borrow and avoid. No sacrifice involved. Borrow and avoid the sacrifice. And so what happens is entitlement programs are now making up roughly 2/3 of the federal spending in our country. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and then there's other so-called safety nets that are implemented into the U.S. economy. Now, many of those programs, and this is important, and I always tell people this, many of those programs began with really good intentions, right? But over time, they've expanded far beyond the original design. And then if you add to that things like the pandemic relief, COVID-19, that whole thing, student loan forgiveness, the attempts of administrations to forgive student loans, endless subsidies. What happens is now you have a culture where people look to Washington for provision instead of looking to the family, to the church, or to the community. I've heard it said many, many times that if the church was being the church, welfare would not exist. I don't know that I believe that anymore, but I heard that for a long time, and I actually have told people that. Like, if the church were being the church, but the church in America would not be able to keep up with the social programs today. Now, listen, ladies and gentlemen, there are people that really need it, and I'm a firm believer that the programs were put into place to help people get back on their feet. Struggling people need a little pick-me-up, right? They need a little boost. But now it's become a lifestyle. And as I said, entitlement is it's more than paychecks from the government. Entitlement is now an attitude. Like, the attitude is, you owe me. You owe me. I said in the previous podcast, I quoted John F. Kennedy multiple times. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That mentality is gone. That doesn't exist anymore. And so now entitlement programs are making up 2/3 of the federal spending. Good intentions have turned into something completely and totally different. And so we've got a culture where the federal government is looked to for stability. And I often say, and I had a tremendous history teacher in high school, Mr. Skiviad, who always said, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. Think about that. Doomed to repeat them. And so you look back to gain an understanding of where you're headed. And Rome did exactly what we're doing today, ladies and gentlemen. By the 3rd century, the empire was handing out free grain to over 200,000 citizens. And to pay for it, they debased their currency. They watered down the coins with cheaper metals. I've told you this over the last several episodes of this program. This is exactly what we're doing. Inflation followed in Rome, and inflation followed in America. And trust in the economy collapsed. And so here's the spiritual truth. Debt is bondage. Proverbs 22:7 says, the borrower is servant to the lender. And America's living that reality. There's no other way to explain this, ladies and gentlemen. When you're spending more than you're bringing in, when the debt is higher than what you make, there is a problem, and America is living that reality. Think about it this way. We are borrowing from foreign nations in some cases that are our rivals, like China. And we borrow to keep funding a culture that refuses to live within its means. Gone are the days of World War II, that generation, where they were giving up for the good of everyone. So this is not just about fiscal mismanagement. It's civic and moral failure. Because if entitlement, think about this, if entitlement defines a generation, then debt will define that nation. And unless we rediscover what sacrifice and stewardship means, well, the numbers, ladies and gentlemen, they don't lie. We're on a crash course. And then this phrase that I've been using, bred in circuses. Rome did this strategically to distract their citizens from what is really happening. They used gladiators and games. And today we've built in America and in the world the most advanced distraction machine in history. Think about this. The average American spends over 7 hours a day on some sort of device, mostly phones. Streaming services are pouring out endless shows for binge watching because we have so much time on our hands now, ladies and gentlemen, that we can't just watch one show per day or even per week like, it used to be back in the day. Now you got to sit down and watch it all. That's why they just continue to spit out the same types of shows. Sports franchises in America, they rake in billions. Social media applications, well, they're causing the citizens to be addicted with dopamine hits. That's, using short videos and outrage cycles. Now, none of these things that I've mentioned are evil by themselves, ladies and gentlemen, but together they've become the modern day circuses, the distractions. And here's the danger. Entertainment is replacing engagement. When you think about civic virtue, or just what it means, just about being present in the home, being present with the person you're sitting across at the table, being present with the person you're out to dinner with, being present, you invite people to your house and everybody's on a phone, being present. This is what's happening. So on the issue of civic virtue, instead of joining civic groups, volunteering, and even voting, you got to put voting out there, we're tuning out and checking out. There's a word I want you to remember, okay? And it's worth remembering. Amuse. Say that. Wherever you are, just say amuse, okay? The prefix a means not, and muse means to think. Did you catch it? Amuse. The prefix a means not, and muse means to think. So amuse literally means not to think. And that's what constant entertainment does. It numbs us. It numbs our ability to think. Critically think. Rome's circuses, well, they did not just entertain, they pacified. Citizens ignored corruption and decline because they had bread in their belly and a show in their eyes. And America risked the exact same fate. I want you to think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Our national conversations revolve more around Super Bowl halftime shows or the latest celebrity scandal than around civic duty or community service. We elevate social media influencers over our leaders. And it gets worse. We actually reward outrage over responsibility. And then slowly, we forget the habits. I talked about this in the first program, that freedom requires. What habits are those? Discipline, sacrifice, and service. Freedom can't survive when citizens become spectators. And that is exactly what the bread and circuses of our age is turning us into. Spectators of a nation in decline. Pat Buchanan wrote a book years ago, longer ago than, if I don't even know if I'm saying that grammatically accurately, but like, let's just say this. He wrote it a long time ago, and to me, it's crazy how long ago it was that he wrote it. I think I pieced that together. Who knows? Anyway, it was titled Suicide of a Superpower. Suicide of a Superpower. I've often referenced on my program Khrushchev back in the 60s from Russia. Pounded that shoe on the table, and he declared, and many would call it prophetically, that America was not going to be defeated from the outside. No, there was another plan in place. America would be defeated from the inside. I mentioned on the first program, John Adams said it, that the Constitution was designed and written and implemented for a moral and virtuous people. And without it, the Constitution could not stand. And so the very foundation of everything that has made this nation great is crumbling. And if the foundation crumbles, well, the house is going to come tumbling down, ladies and gentlemen. There's no way around it. So what are we going to do? I told you the diagnosis is easy. Fixing it is harder. Renewal is harder, but it's not impossible. And that's the hope. That's the hope, is that someone hears this, or someone hears someone like Charlie Kirk or others out there that are sounding the alarm and saying, listen, we are running out of time. If this thing is going to be fixed, we better fix it now. So here's some practical ways that we can rebuild civic virtue. And we have to start where it matters the most, and that's with our families. I dedicated an entire program about our families. Find it on our podcasting platforms. Go back and take a listen. We have to begin to once again teach our kids responsibility. Now, I'm not going to tell you how to do your business, but like I grew up and there were chores and there were expectations. And don't just hand them everything. Make them work for it. Talk openly about money, saving, giving, avoiding debt. Model this. This is called stewardship. Share stories of sacrifices from grandparents. And my granny often told me the story, and she looked back at World War II, and she told us about where everything had to go dark because they were afraid that there would be bombers that would fly over. And so it was a bit of a national directive that at a certain time, turn everything off so they can't see anything. But share stories of sacrifice, how your grandparents sacrificed. I remember a picture of my grandfather, my dad's dad, with holes in his shoes. You know, we don't, in today's society, we don't have holes in our shoes. And if we have a hole in our shoe, you know, you don't patch that thing. You go buy new shoes and you throw the old ones away. When I've traveled to India, I often tell this story that in India, if it doesn't rain, the crops die. In America, if it doesn't rain, we get a water hose. Things are different. We gotta stir up the stories of sacrifice. And that's what scares me the most about this generation. And even my generation, if I'm being honest, is we have not had to sacrifice. We don't know what that means. We don't know what that looks like. But share stories of veterans, of history. Let the next generation know freedom wasn't free and it's not free now. But the other thing we have to start doing is going to have to happen in our churches. We have to preach discipline and preach service and preach them both as spiritual habits. Connect them to the Word of God as an expectation, not as a suggestion. Discipleship isn't just Bible study. It's not a class. I had a conversation with someone recently about discipleship, and they said to me, in all sincerity, have you thought about doing like a discipleship course? And although teaching is a good thing, it's not just about that. It's not just a Bible study. It's building character that contributes to the common good, and it's leading by example. We have to begin to create service opportunities that put our faith into action, where we have an opportunity to respond to the word that is preached from behind the pulpit on a Sunday. We have to feed our neighbors. We have to mentor our youth. And we have to volunteer. And in our schools, offer yourself as a volunteer to schools or hospitals or nursing homes or veteran centers. And in our communities, we have to begin to encourage civic involvement. Be a member of a school board, community cleanups, take part in a community cleanup, local volunteering, whatever. Because we have to begin to rebuild trust, and trust is going to be rebuilt face to face, not by a phone, not by a social media app. It's when you shake hands and you serve side by side. That is what made America great. Because everything was flowing from Christendom, from the Bible. And that's how we revive civic virtue. It's not happening from Washington. It's not a policy. You won't find it in policy papers, but from ordinary people like you and me practicing extraordinary responsibility. That's how it revives, ladies and gentlemen. Entertainment and debt, bread and circuses, they are two forces, and historically we know this now. They destroyed Rome, and they now, ladies and gentlemen, are threatening America. But history isn't fate. We can choose a different path. Families can reclaim responsibility. You can hear this today and respond to it. Churches can begin to disciple virtue. Communities can rebuild trust. And if we do, America still has hope. And if we don't, Rome won't just be history. Rome, for us, for America, for this nation, for this people, Rome will be prophecy. Thanks for joining me on this extended edition of What's Important Now. Additional content. Make sure you subscribe and share. And as always, fight the good fight of faith. Contend for the faith. There is a cause. It does matter. And it is important now. Continue to pray for the family, the friends, and the loved ones, especially his wife and his children of Charlie Kirk. He did fight the good fight, and it cost him his life. May God bless all of them, and may God bless you. Take care.